I'm Kristin Blume. I'm the Senior Manager of Major Projects and Transport in the ACT Government Environment Planning Directorate, and I'm the Chair here today, so I'll be trying to make sure that we do get that really great input to feed into CURF and to support the fantastic research that they're doing for Canberra and the region. So I'll just briefly introduce to you our rapporteur and our session presenter today, but I'll just give you a quick overview first of the way I'm hoping to run this session. First, we'll have David Flannery give a very brief overview. I think he's only got 8 slides, of integrated transport for Canberra and the region. We'll follow that with some brief questions and answers for that presentation, and then we'll move into a couple of sessions at your tables where we'll discuss some of the current challenges for integrated transport for Canberra and the region, report back on that, and then come and talk about some of the ideas and solutions for the future. So it's quite a tight session by the time we get reporting back and everything in, but I'm hopeful we can actually cover this whole thing, and I'll come back in more detail about those workshop sessions before we start those. So I'll introduce, Viv Shaw is the, Viv Straw, is the rapporteur for this session, so he'll be wandering around, he'll be listening to you, taking notes and trying to get down all of the ideas and discussion and issues that you identify today so that you can feed back into the report from this forum. Viv, I'm sure many of you know, is the current president of the ACT chapter of the Planning Institute of Australia and has a long career as an urban geographer, specialising in urban and regional planning. David Flannery, who's going to be presenting on the topic of integrated transport for Canberra and the region shortly, is a practising architect and has many other qualifications. He's most recently working with CURF and has completed a paper called Transport-Oriented Urban Transformation, which he'll be talking a little bit about in his presentation. So I'll hand over to David.
Thank you very much, Kristin. The topic for this afternoon's workshop, as has just been explained, is integrated transport for Canberra and the region. So I thought I'd start off by trying to set down some definitions for what integrated transport is. And there's several ways of looking at it. First, at a fairly basic level, integration or integrated transport can be understood as government policy settings for the integration of different transport modes. Secondly, and perhaps a little bit more introspectively, it may mean the policy settings about dealing with infrastructure provision, the management of it and the communication information that's distributed with regard to the system and pricing and ticketing and all of those sorts of matters. The third, and a little bit more holistically, it should, I think, encompass an examination and a pursuit of the integration between the transport measures themselves and land use planning measures. And fourthly, integration with other policy areas such as community, individual health and education, housing policy, and of course the environment. And that's not only about the planetary issues that we're dealt with in this morning's session in this room, but also local issues dealing with the urban realm and the built environment. Transport integration through governance, I think, is also worth discussing. A further type of integration is that between the agencies involved in the specification and the implementation of this wide range of policy instruments. The European Commission's guidance document, Sustainable Urban Transport Plans of now 10 years ago, I think is a useful guide. And it distinguishes 3 more definitions. Horizontal integration, which is between agencies and departments within one city organisation. Spatial integration between adjacent local authorities, and our mandate here in CURF is to look at not only Canberra but our surrounding regions as well and how we integrate with them. And third, what they call vertical integration between the local, the regional and the national, and in their case the other European administrations. So there is inherently significant overlap between all of these definitions, which adds a fair degree of complexity to any analysis. In pursuing transport integration strategies in urban planning, there is, I think, no lack of research to be referenced, espousing and championing the various outcomes and the benefits of individual policies and strategies. But I also note that there is not so much a lack, but there's not a real lot of quantitative assessments, the data that we need to enable clear problem definition and to facilitate decision making at the policy level. Now, looking more closely at the first definition I talked about, the integration of various modes, contemporary best practice will have, it gives a priority to walking and to cycling and to public transport over other vehicular traffic. Contemporary urban planning policymakers are implementing such a hierarchy in numerous urban design and urban infrastructure works that are happening here and elsewhere. And this image that I've shown here is a recent New South Wales policy document, which has been unashamedly lifted from an earlier UK document, as you can see. And closer to home, a really good example of what's going on that's realising this sort of philosophy is Constitution Avenue. Most of you would have seen the work that's going on there to widen Constitution Avenue at the moment. And they're implementing a fairly strict hierarchy of this basis with the work that's happening with the National Capital Authority and Territory and Municipal Services working closely together on that. Although the success of that example, I must readily admit, relies very much so on the parallel and almost adjacent Parks Way, which continues as a high-speed motor vehicle corridor. Now, Kristin mentioned that throughout this year, CURF has been preparing a paper collating national and international research on transport-oriented urban transformation, how aligning transport planning with land use planning can make a positive contribution to urban futures. This paper is being concurrently released with this forum today. We're hoping that a hard copy is here by now on the table. It was promised to us by midday today. In any event, it'll be available on our website next week. In summary, the key research learnings from that paper, and I'd like to go through those very quickly. Research learning 1, urban consolidation, where it's underpinned by public transit revitalisation of land with mixed-use developments, brings with it a triple bottom line benefit. That's social, environmental and financial economic benefits. Research learning 2, developing public transport-oriented growth and creating compact and walkable neighbourhoods can reduce car distances travelled, it can lower traffic congestion and emissions and provide a significant benefit to community health and individual health and stimulate increased productivity. Number 3, it increases land value and that may provide a revenue source opportunity to return a significant proportion of the cost of the public transport development adjacent to the transport corridor with those transport-oriented developments. Number 4, containing the extent of our urban sprawl, greenfield urban developments on the fringe, can assist in minimising household transport expenditure, costs you less to drive your car from a shorter distance, and it does also protect fringe real estate values. Number 5, transit-oriented urban renewal does provide the opportunity to plan and invest for the integration of affordable and social housing infrastructure and services. 6, with the transport sector now accounting for about 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions in metropolitan areas particularly, and that's a worldwide figure, it's probably greater in Canberra. Less car-dependent urban forms is a good response to our need for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And our final finding was that we believe it will be of great value if we can establish further research on all of this. I made the point earlier that there's not a lot of quantitative data available, so that if we can start to monitor the social, environmental and economic outcomes of our public transport systems and monitor them in time as the infrastructure is developed and started in its use phase, we'll get a benefit out of that later on in being able to compare and contrast various systems around the world, not only our own but others. Just quickly to finish off, I just wanted to present a map that Barbara, I and the others in our CURF team looked at earlier in the year. Now this map's not based on any detailed research, it's really just a design idea, a concept, but we wanted to look at how into the future Canberra's first stage and subsequent stages of its light rail might interconnect with an intercapital very fast train, high-speed rail link, and also with a regional connection so that we can connect some of our near neighbours regionally, Goulburn, Cooma, and even connecting the port, an enhanced port at Eden with that. So it's just put up there for discussion purposes. You might like to comment on that in your group presentations. We were asked to put a series of dot points up as to questions that we might challenge ourselves with in the next session. So I turned what I've just talked to you about into one of these famous word clouds. And it's all there in front of you. Even the European Commission got a mention there somewhere. But Kristin, thankfully, has tried to summarise those a little bit more briefly, and I'll leave that slide up there so that we can use that as we move into the discussion phase of this afternoon. So thanks very much for your time.
Now we've got about 10 minutes or so if anyone does have any questions for David following his presentation before we move into some discussions at our tables. So is there anything that's a burning question?
Look, I tend to agree with you. I think that there's in any city, there's always going to be people that are living in areas that are not well serviced with public transport, whatever the form of the city, whether it be a ribbon development, a city like our own, which is a multinodal city. That's always going to be the case, and I think you're specifically talking about Canberra. At the moment, the light rail proposal is just a single stage, and there's in all probability, given that the first stage is a success, is that there will be subsequent stages, and over the next decades, generations, there's going to be more and more. Now you look at Melbourne at the moment. Melbourne started its light rail back in the early 1880s. It's a city like you describe. It's it's only the middle suburbs that really get access to their light rail. But as the city sprawled out, those people that are on the fringe haven't got access to good public transport. They've got to get into a middle suburb. So, yes, I agree with you, but at the same time, I think it's all going to work for a better car-dependent city. We can't keep going on with a business-as-usual case with creating more traffic congestion into the future. We can talk more about that. Yeah, well, you mentioned both light rail and buses, and that's a big part of what we're here talking about today, integrated transport. So we're not looking at one system as against another. We're looking at bringing together an integrated system, including the ability to walk and to cycle, and it's all part of the big picture. Kristin can talk at that at length, because the work that she's involved with the ACT government at the moment is integrating bus policy and light rail policy. So more of that will come out, I'm quite sure. You mentioned also the Commonwealth Games. I think that's part of the story with the Gold Coast Rail, but I don't think it had a big part in it. It's like designing the stadiums at Homebush for the Sydney Olympics. They fulfilled a really good need for the Olympic Games, but now they've got an ongoing use. They've been changed to a certain extent, and they now have a continuing and viable and valid use into the future. And I suspect the Gold Coast Light Rail's been designed for that primarily, rather than the immediate concern with the Games. Well, very important. You know, the children are equal members of our community, and we need to examine our transport planning policy and indeed our land use planning policies to encompass people of all ages, not only the young but the old and frail as well. So the simple answer to your question is very important.